welcome everyone to today's live Q&A. So a couple of housekeeping things before we jump into the questions. And that is that next month will be our last monthly live Q&A. So March will be the last monthly one. And then after that, we will be going to every 3 months. So March, June, September, and December will be the times for the live Q&A moving forward. Now, in between times, of course, you are more than welcome to email me any questions that you might have that I will answer in my blog. So my blog will still come out. I've just resumed that. That will be coming out every 2 weeks moving forward. And I'm very happy to answer questions that way as well. In addition, obviously, to the live Q&As. But again, for those who just joined, next month will be the last monthly live Q&A, and after that, we're going to every 3 months. So again, there's options of asking me questions or emailing me candy.thriving@gmail.com. You can email me your questions and I will answer them in my blog in between times. So feel free to go ahead and type in any questions that you might have into the chat. And while we're waiting to get rolling with some of the questions, one of the topics or the main topic that I wanted to discuss with you today is the notion of, what is it exactly that we're doing with brain retraining? What is it? What is the outcome that we're hoping for? Now, a lot of people might say, well, symptom alleviation, right? Like we're looking to alleviate our symptoms, we're looking to feel better. And I would say, yes, and that's a byproduct of what we're actually hoping to achieve through the retraining tools and processes. So if you think about it, whether you're doing rounds of practice or it's meditation or it's catching your thought processes and actively elevating your emotional state, ongoing, whether it's practicing self-compassion and acceptance, maybe doing some inner parts work around that. Regardless of the tools that you're using, all of those tools are designed to lead to a specific outcome. And that specific outcome is changing our internal state. So I think of that like the internal state that we're aiming, that these tools are helping us to achieve, is a sense of inner peace and contentment. And that inner peace and contentment, that state that we're trying to create or we're working towards creating, is not contingent upon what's happening either internally, symptom wise, or externally in our life around us. So, and this is the part where, thinking greater than how we feel, and I would add to that in this case, feeling greater than how we feel, really comes into play. So what we're doing, let's say you do a round of practice or you do a really great, meditation, and you get into that zone where for a moment you're feeling that inner contentment regardless of what's happening. What happens as we achieve that state is our system settles down, right? Our nervous system settles down. There's a sense of kind of letting go rather than perhaps fighting against or resisting what is. Sometimes people will feel that physically, like I often feel that in my muscle tension, releasing the body, becoming more relaxed. There's a sense of sort of bigger picture perspective in terms of the contentment, that recognition that despite where we're at and what's happening, we can still find that sense of inner peace, that sense of well-being that comes from a deeper place within, that's not contingent on things looking a certain way or things having to be at a certain point in our progress before we start to experience that. And so, what happens is when we get into these beautiful states of inner peace and contentment, or whatever you want to call it, you might have a different name for it. Then, what that does is that regulation in the nervous system, that letting go feeling, that sense of well being neurochemically, it activates our inner healing mechanisms. It's what allows our system to really be able to do what it needs to do in order to heal and to move forward. So we all have this inner healing mechanism. We all have this inner wisdom that excuse me, that knows what's required and knows what we need in order to move forward and heal. And we're creating the conditions by activating this internal state. We're creating the conditions whereby this part can then really come forward and do what it needs to do to move us forward. And that's where we see, the symptom alleviation. We start to see maybe changes in our emotional or neurochemical state a little bit more ongoing, and so on and so forth, right? It gives us more access. And so I just invite you, for the next little while, to reflect on that, or to keep that in mind while you're in the process of retraining. Like, this is what you're aiming towards, is that internal state. And oftentimes what happens is we experience it, initially it might just be for a moment or two, right? We might have brief moments where we get there, or, we might have moments where we stay there a little bit longer. Maybe it's, an hour instead of 5 minutes. And eventually, as we do more and more of what's required, and as we find the right tools that really help us, that are conducive to us personally, to getting into this state, we spend more time there. And then that's where we see, some pretty significant, often, changes and outcomes. And regardless of how quickly those situations or circumstances change, our internal perspective has changed. There's more quality of life within us, as a result of attaining, this internal state. So, something to think about. This is your aim, right? This is your aim with the retraining, and then trusting that the outcome of that, or the byproduct of that, is more health and well-being, a fuller life, quality of life, all of those things that, you're wanting to achieve through your retraining. So that's what I woke up with on my mind this morning. So that's what I thought I would share. So, if anyone has any questions, again, feel free to pop them into the chat. Or if you want to speak them out loud, you're more than welcome to do that. You can raise your hand and we'll do that. Please know the session is being recorded, but I am pinned. So it won't be a picture of you, but your voice will be on the recording if you choose to share aloud, which is absolutely wonderful. Otherwise, feel free to pop it in the chat. Again, the process here will spend, 45 minutes, give or take, on answering questions. And then the last 15 minutes, we'll do a little bit of breath work and a meditation to help achieve that state, that internal state that we were just talking about. So that's going to be, the plan for today. Yeah. So there's a question that's rolled in here that says, there's been an activation of gut related symptoms that has recurred for several months now, and among stressful life circumstances. Feeling like fight or flight in the nervous system has reactivated, in the gut, and having to calm and redirect attention away from gut sensations ongoing. What might you recommend? Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things in that statement that I think are really important to recognize, that you are recognizing, and that's one. One is this notion of, it's stressful circumstances that is playing a role in this, right? So as soon as there are external stressors, there are situations that take us into more of that stress response, we see more of the limbic system related symptoms either activated, reactivated, or getting stronger, right? And so that recognition that, okay, this is a byproduct of the current circumstances that I'm experiencing. And because we know this and have this understanding, then the focus becomes, okay, so how do I negate the impact of those stressors, and at the same time support, my gut, or whatever else is showing up in the healing process. So, for those of you who've worked with me before or attended a lot of these sessions, you'll know that I tend to take a more holistic approach to the rewiring process, meaning that sometimes it's very helpful to have physical supports in our system in addition to the brain retraining, and that these two things can work synchronistically together to help us move forward faster. So rather than relying 100% on the brain to change the physiology, we can support the physiology to calm down so that the signals from our body's physiology back to the brain are not signals of a stress response to the same degree. And it helps that process. So the overall recognition is yes, the root cause is still brain and nervous system regulation, but there are things that we can do to help support that process going on or moving forward. So that being said, some basic things to support your gut if they aren't already in place, I would definitely recommend doing that. And that doesn't mean going down the whole rabbit hole, right? It might mean, a good probiotic, or maybe you have a holistic nutritionist that you work with or something that can help. Just put some things in place and then you set that aside, right? There's not a lot of focus or airtime on that, but we're giving that physiological support through a time of stress. The other thing to recognize is that with the gut, the gut is a major producer of serotonin. So that's the happy, feel good neurochemical, or one of them in our brain. And so when there is gut stuff going on, sometimes it can affect our ability to access, more of the happy, feel good neurochemicals. And so definitely brain retraining and actively reaching for that elevated emotional state as much as possible is a good strategy. We can also look at introducing some precursors to the happy feel good neurochemicals that might also help support. Right. And so 5-HTP, for example, is a supplement that is a precursor to serotonin. And so sometimes when people are really struggling, just having that little bit of extra support, that elements or precursors in our system can actually help us create and activate a little bit more of the happy, feel good neurochemistry. So again, it's not the solution, it's a temporary addition to help support us in moving forward in a way that might be a little bit quicker than when we're solely relying on brain retraining. And that's the idea. So, along similar lines, and this is just kind of an aside for dopamine, amino L-tyrosine is a precursor for dopamine and can be really useful in helping us, increase a little bit more of that dopamine, which of course is another happy, feel good neurochemical in our system. So, physiological supports aside, looking at, okay, so here's the circumstances. I understand what's happening. I understand the relationship between, what's happening in my gut and what's happening, stress wise. So, what is it that I can do to take care of myself as best as I can and decrease the impact of those stressors? Now, a lot of times, stressors, there are certain things that we can do to alleviate certain stressors, right? Like there's actions that we can take that minimize or decrease certain stressors. Other stressors are beyond our control. So there's situations or circumstances that, we can't change necessarily. They are what they are. And so, what we look at in those situations, so when something is beyond your control, what is it that is within your control? Right. And so, in that case, we're looking at, okay, so how do I change my internal response to these stressors? How do I change my perspective or what I'm focusing on so that the impact of what's happening in life circumstances around me is having a lesser degree of impact on my physiology, on my nervous system, on my capacity to function. And so part of that definitely is looking at, okay, how much airtime are we giving it? How much time are we spending in our minds problem solving problems that aren't solvable? And that's where the brain retraining, the kind of active redirection comes into play. oftentimes there's an additional component of needing to feel the feelings for the things that we cannot change, you know? So there may be an element of grief and loss with that. There may be an aspect of frustration that this is beyond my control and needing to release that emotion or energy and emotion that corresponds with it so that, we come to a place of a little bit more acceptance of what is, acceptance not being resignation, but a recognition that, my efforts fighting against what's actually already happening is not conducive to helping me move forward. It's just burning up energy and time and thought processes. And it's not, conducive to moving me into a state where I can deal with this more effectively or navigate it in a more resilient way, right? So we're looking at building up that resilience, and sometimes in order to build up resilience we have to feel the feelings. So feeling the feelings can be like literally just feeling the feelings, or noticing, when I bring up these stressful circumstances, are there particular areas in the body or sensations in the body that I'm noticing that are really coming forward? And if there are, can I provide some support to that part? It might be putting a hand there. It might be simply breathing into that part of the body, making space for those sensations and allowing those sensations to be there and to move if they're wanting to move or not. We're not doing this to try and get a particular outcome or result. We're doing this to kind of support our system. And as we're supporting our system, oftentimes it creates more space, it creates more bandwidth of tolerance for what's happening, right? And so yeah, so to me there is, the physiological component of supporting, the brain retraining component of supporting, and then looking at, the nervous system. How do I bring in more regulation in my nervous system? How do I fill myself up, feed my soul, fill my cup, do the things that are giving back to me so that I can navigate these stressful situations with a little bit more ease and grace, so that I can change my perspective and look at that bigger picture and recognize that most things in life are temporary. This too shall pass. One way or another it will pass. And so, looking at that element of self-care, self-compassion, feeding oneself is really important in this situation as well. And, when sensations are coming up 24/7, we can't realistically always be 100% of the time actively redirecting away from that. But what we can do is recognize that just because they're happening doesn't mean we have to give them our full focus of attention, right? So you think of it like music playing in the background of a restaurant, right? Where your focus is on the person that you're maybe eating with, or the food, the conversation that you're having. That's happening in the background, but it's not what you're giving your attention to. A similar principle could apply here, right? So we're noticing that in the background. It's okay if it's there in the background, but what am I orienting to? What am I focused on? And it might be as simple as the task at hand. It might be, maybe you're doing a meditation or yoga nidra, you're focusing on that, and just allowing that to be in the background, and knowing that as we're not feeding it with giving it our attention, with fortune telling and predicting and catastrophizing around it, or feeding into, like, because what we focus on is what we grow, feeding into the intensity of those symptoms, if we can rise above them in a way, and just giving our focus. It's like, yeah, you're allowed to be there, but I'm not going to give you my airtime. And learning to do that, it's a skill, right? It takes a little bit of practice and effort to develop that. But once we develop that, we have way more capacity to stay focused on other things, which then allows those signals to start to die down, because we're not giving it our attention. We're telling the limbic system, or we're sending the message to the limbic system that this isn't important. Right. And if this isn't important and it's something to ignore, then it's not something to get stressed out about. And if it's not something to get stressed out about, then our whole system calms down and relaxes and creates those conditions that are conducive to healing, whatever that is, right? And so, yeah, that would be my recommendations for sure. So, can you explain why during the brain retraining process, new symptoms keep appearing and other ones might go? So, yes, absolutely, we can talk about that. That's a really good question, and it happens a lot, for a lot of people. So, if you're experiencing that, know that you're not alone in that, and that's part of the process. And the way that I think about it is rewiring your limbic system is like peeling back layers of an onion, right? So you're actively working your tools, you're doing what you need to do, perhaps your incremental training on something specific, and you start to notice changes. And so you're noticing, certain things shifting, some things maybe falling away, or you're just getting really good at catching your thought processes and elevating your emotional state, and it's creating a different neurochemical state in your system, a different state in your nervous system, and then that layer starts to fall away, right? So the layer that you're working on falls away, and you go to the next layer. And in that next layer of rewiring, you might encounter some different symptoms. Or as you're peeling back the layers and you're going through the layers, you might get to a layer further on that has symptoms that you had rewired on a previous layer, right? And so sometimes people think of that like, okay, I'm going backwards, this is again. But what's actually generally happening in your system is you're getting to a deeper layer of wiring. And as you're moving to those deeper layers, sometimes the patterns of association are similar to previous patterns, right? And so that's why we see symptoms kind of recurring, or have new symptoms showing up that are associated with whatever layer you're working on. So this is part of the reason why, most brain retraining programs talk about, not focusing on the symptoms, right? Not giving them a lot of airtime to the best of your ability and knowing that they will shift and change in their own time. And it kind of comes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of today, is that, our focus is on cultivating a particular internal state, an internal state that's conducive to healing and recovery. That's the aim with our brain retraining tools. The aim is not to make this go away. That will happen on its own as a byproduct, right? And so having the understanding of, okay, there's layers to this, things are going to come and go, perhaps as you're going along, if you experience an increase in stressors, you might also experience an increase in symptoms temporarily while your system is navigating that until that settles down. So there's a lots of factors that kind of play into this ebb and flow with symptoms, and that's why we don't want to give it too much focus. We want to focus on the parts that are kind of our job to do, if you want to think of it that way, and trusting that those other pieces are going to resolve, in their own time. They are going to go away, and the less airtime we give to them, the less importance, the less, symptom thought patterns or automatic negative thoughts we associate with them, the quicker that's going to shift, the sooner that that's going to go away. And so the next question is, how would you recommend retraining on medicine allergies and reactions? Yeah, that one is a little bit tougher, just simply because unless you need to take a medication, you're not probably going to take that medication as part of incremental training, right? And so, what I would suggest with that, there's a couple of things. Number one, um, do your retraining on other things and get a really good foundation for recovery, I would say, before necessarily working on this, unless it's something that is really important that you really need in your life or that you have to take despite having allergies and reactions. Then obviously you're going to work with it right away. But the more solid of a foundation you have, through limbic rewiring on other things and through nervous system regulation, the easier it is going to be to address this. So if that's a possibility, definitely do that. If not, and even if it is, a good place to start is to focus on doing rounds in your imagination, right? And so you're triggering yourself in your imagination, imagining yourself taking whatever it is that you need to take. And then you're immediately going to go into your rounds of practice. And of course, that might look different depending on what program you're doing, but they all pretty much do the same thing, right? And so it's that incremental training through imagination. And when you do that, you're changing your pattern of association with taking that medication, right? You're teaching your limbic system and your nervous system that this is not something to get stressed out about. And so, we're actively working on that. And then when you get to a point that you can, think about the medication or imagine taking it, and there's no sort of physiological response, no nervous system response, things are kind of more calm and all is well, so to speak, then what you can do is move that into either a future visualization in a round of practice or just as a mental rehearsal where you go from using it as a trigger to using it as, okay, I'm taking this in, I'm feeling great, this is doing what it needs to do, and it's really supportive of me. And you imagine yourself and mentally rehearse yourself doing optimal with that medication in your system. And and I suggest kind of this progression, right? When something is really triggering to us, it's better to use it as a trigger first and kind of calm down the association with it before we try to mentally rehearse everything going well. Because if we just jump to everything going well and it's a pretty big trigger, oftentimes that trigger will be in the background and kind of sabotaging a little bit of your happy, feel good, calm, well neurochemical state and mental rehearsal that you're trying to do. So that's where, this sort of seeing it as stages or a stepping stone towards that is really useful. And then working with it that way. And then physically taking the medication, that would be kind of working your way up to that, is looking at, okay, is this something that I can just, maybe you start with holding it in your hand or putting it to your lips or licking it with your tongue, and then, doing rounds of practice. So treating that as incremental training or taking a small amount and then working your way up to that. And again, if this is a situation where this is something that you have to take, and that there's not as much room or window for working your way up to that, then really doing the best that you can to have a very solid round of practice with it and spending a lot of time in changing your emotional state and changing your focus, and doing the same at any later point if and when, symptoms are occurring. And this is where, sometimes longer meditations, like what pops into my mind is like Joe Dispenza's, 50-55 minute meditations where you're actively cultivating a specific emotional state. Something like that could be really useful. Or, you can use other meditations in addition to rounds of practice as well. Next question. I've been retraining for 2 years. How do I get out of the cell danger response? It becomes worse with bad air quality and rain. My functional medicine doctor is trying low dose naltrexone. Yeah, low dose naltrexone can be very helpful with people. It often is used for these kind of chronic conditions. And the other piece to really look at is, okay, so your system, even in your own wording here, your system is talking about a cell danger response, right? So there's a signal in your system that is saying things are not well, that we are in danger. So what is that? That's nervous system dysregulation, right? That's the fight or flight response. That's the part that we can work with. And so the more regulated your nervous system is, the more calm you are working at, sort of that level of regulation. So that involves, I would say, more meditations, more restorative practices, more elevation of emotional states that are feel good but calming, like gratitude, love, those sorts of things. You want to increase the amount of those things that you're doing and really making that your go to throughout the day You can also use your imagination and visualization, visualizing your cells functioning optimally, visualizing your cells doing what they're designed to do in a state of balance and homeostasis and working with ease and so on and so forth. So we can use our imagination and mental rehearsal and visualization and intention, around this as well to support us. Next question. Why is healing chronic illness so complex and hard to actually finally heal it? Yeah. So, again, that's kind of a lot of people's experience at times, right? So, some people, don't struggle as much as other people. And a lot of people do struggle. And oftentimes, those who do, there are numerous elements or components to what's going on in their system, right? So they're not necessarily just healing from chemical sensitivities, for example, or long haul COVID. They've got a number of factors. And when you have a number of factors, it does feel definitely more complex, right? And you sometimes can get stuck in that space of, okay, so you're actively using your tools and doing your processes and certain things are changing, but then there's a flare up in another area, right? And that's where it can become sometimes a little bit disheartening, or we have this feeling of like this is a lot, or this is overwhelming, or this is really hard to navigate. And what we want to keep in mind, again, it comes back to what seems to be the theme of this live Q&A, is this notion of creating this internal state that's conducive to healing, and recognizing that the focus isn't on our symptoms, right? That those will sort themselves out as we do what we need to do in order to retrain our brain and re-regulate our nervous systems. And so, if we can take that sort of approach or perspective, what happens is we get less caught up in, okay, this went down, but this went up, or now this is, what's primary, or, there's so many different aspects. How do I navigate all of these? It really takes the focus off of that and back onto what our job is, what we're meant to do, what is within kind of our purview of what we can control and what we can actively change within our system. And so, coming back to the things that help you, not only rewire your brain and re regulate your nervous system, but that place of acceptance of, yeah, things are all over the place at times when we're rewiring, and that's okay. And again, acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It doesn't mean that we don't want this to change. We're just not going to fight against what's showing up in our system. And along those lines is a sense of, can we invoke a little bit more self compassion? Can we come to a place of recognizing, like, when we are really struggling, that this is a struggle, and that those challenges are a part of life? And can we bring in that compassion and loving kindness to ourselves, And this, those four statements that I just said are part of Kristen Neff's self compassion break, right? So that's a tool that we can use for ourselves along with other self-compassion practices to really support us in, you know our journey. So a lot of times there is a component that's required of a loving kindness aspect towards ourselves, not being so hard on the self, not um falling into the pattern of something is wrong with me because I'm not making the progress, or, this doesn't work for me because my situation or circumstances is different, or am I not worthy and deserving of recovery, or why is this easier for other people than me? There must be something wrong with me. I must be fundamentally bad. These are the kind of subconscious, often unconscious layers of belief systems and processes that can sometimes happen when we're dealing with very complex situations, right? And so that's where showing up in a loving way for ourselves, having that level of self compassion, Sometimes even forgiving ourselves, giving ourselves permission to be human. We don't have to be perfect. Our retraining doesn't have to be perfect, but every day is a fresh start. Every day is a brand new day. And what can we do today to support ourselves and support our recovery in the best way that we know how, from that loving space, as opposed to feeling the pressure of this needs to change, and or I'm not doing enough, or whatever those other pieces are that come up. All right. So, next question. How would you advise dealing with resistance to doing brain retraining? I struggle with past visualizations, as it is difficult to sort through past memories to find a good one, which does not have associations with less positive memories. Yeah. So to me, that's kind of two separate questions. So there's the part of resistance, and then there's the part of, what do I do with these past memories? So let's talk about past memories first, because that's an easier one to answer, and then we'll come back. We'll come back to resistance. So if you're finding that with your past memories, there's a couple of options. One thing would be, not to overanalyze it, right? Like sometimes we can get caught up in trying to find the perfect memory, or a memory that doesn't have any other kind of not or less than optimal associations with it. And rather than getting caught up in that process of trying to find the perfect memory, we focus on just a little aspect of a memory and blow that up, make that big. Focus just on that small piece, and use that in a way that elevates your emotional state, and then you move from your past memory to the next step. um, as soon as you're at that place where there is an element of positive feeling with that. Like you've made the volume of that kind of as big as you can, and you move on before it has a chance to go to other associations that may be less positive. So, what sometimes happens with people is if they're trying to spend, several minutes in a past memory that's a little bit, a mixed bag, so to speak, we can start out really strong, and then those other pieces start to come in. And so if we shorten up the time, even if that means only like 30 seconds or a minute in that, if we shorten up the time and we just make it really potent about focusing on that good piece and then moving on before it really has a chance to get into other things, you're going to get more benefit out of that than you are of spending a longer time frame. It's the quality of what we're doing versus the quantity or the length of time that's really going to give you the most bang for your buck. So that's one thing. Another thing is you can create past memories based on things that you used to like to do, or maybe places that you like to be that aren't a specific memory. So, for example, like in my childhood, one of the things that I loved to do was jump on the trampoline. So, I might not have a specific memory of doing that, but I can use that notion of knowing that I love to do that and place myself back there, jumping on that trampoline, going really high, feeling the wind in my hair, whatever, right? And create something around that brings a feel good sense of freedom, sense of elevated emotion, and then we move on past there. So that's another example. A third possibility, and there are retrainers who do this, who don't go back to their own past memories, but they use their imagination to create, positive possibilities, or they'll imagine, their favorite TV character and what their memories might be, or them having, a really positive experience, and kind of imagine themselves as that character, right? And so it's not about them personally, but if they're putting themselves into the role of that character and experiencing, the positives that that character experiences, you're still getting the happy, feel good neurochemistry. Now, the one sort of downfall, if we want to even call it a downfall, of doing that as opposed to using your own personal memories, is that you're not getting your brain to recognize that there are elements in the past that were positive, that not everything is always about negativity, right? So we have this negativity bias in our brain. And when we're caught in limbic dysfunction, all it sees is what didn't go well. And we forget those moments or times that things actually were good, you know? And even in the cases of children who've had like highly traumatic, really dysfunctional upbringings, even in those cases, there's moments in time of well-being, there's moments in time of contentment, there's moments in time of peace. And so, part of that past memory is to retrain our brain to see things from the bigger picture perspective instead of being stuck in the negativity bias. So, pretending you're another character isn't going to give you that. But what it might do is that as you do that, and as you start to get the benefits of the elevated emotions that come with that, is that it might open up the possibility, because you're then accessing more of the memories associated with that elevated neurochemistry, that it starts to bring to mind other moments in time that were positive. Right. And so it opens up the vault of possibility for what we could then use that does come from, our own personal experience. So it can be kind of like a stepping stone for that. And so, really letting go of this has to look a certain way, it has to be a certain length of time, and making the process about, okay, let's get into something that makes us feel good. Let's bring it up, turn up the volume to the best of our ability, act as though it's real, and then move on before it loses steam. And doing it that way, as opposed to, this long drawn out scenario where you're bringing in absolutely everything sense wise, and your brain has a lot of time to kind of jump in with things that are not as positive, right? So that's the, past visualizations. Resistance in general. So, resistance in general is something that people do experience, sometimes from time to time. We'll go through periods where there's more resistance to doing what we need to do. Or we might have resistance, like in this case, to certain aspects where we're not necessarily completely resistant to all parts of brain retraining, but there are certain pieces that, we find harder to do. So, a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, in order to change, we have to think greater than how we feel, right? Like that's Joe Dispenza's line. And there's a lot of truth to that. So, part of it is learning to cultivate the curious observer to notice when we're in resistance. So, you're in the observer, you're not in the resistance itself. You're witnessing the resistance, you're recognizing that's there, but you're from a place of, okay, yeah, my system doesn't want to do this, but I'm in the observer right now. And from this place of being the observer, instead of buying into those messages, I have a choice. So we can go ahead and do it anyway. You know, and like even to this day, I have a regular meditation practice, and even to this day, I'll go through periods of time where I just don't want to do it, right? Like there's a lot of resistance, and so I'll notice that. It's like, oh, there's that resistance again. That's coming up today. And I still walk over and sit on my cushion and meditate regardless, because I'm not requiring myself to feel like doing it in order to do it. Right. And that's part of thinking greater than how you feel, is you're not living by your feelings. You're not letting your feelings be the one to dictate what you're doing or not doing. You're kind of rising above it. So that's one thing. Another thing that we can do is, to start to get curious about the resistance. Sometimes there is a message there, or there's a younger part of us, and this is where parts work can sometimes come into play, that has certain beliefs or thoughts about, what it's going to happen if we do this. And so by getting really curious about, okay, so what is behind this resistance? How old do I feel when I'm experiencing this resistance? And we can dialogue with that part of us if that's what we choose to do. Or there might be a memory that comes up associated with that. Or we notice the resistance, and we notice in the physiology of our body there's certain sensations that go with that resistance, and we can support it and breathe into those sensations. support it with our hands, breathing into it, accepting that it's there, making space for it, and seeing if there's any insights, that kind of come with that. And sometimes, even just on that sensation level, making space for the sensation and breathing into it, it's enough to kind of shift the experience. Then we have more bandwidth or more space to go ahead and do it anyway. So there's a few different options for sure of how to navigate that. And something to keep in mind is that sometimes we will experience or encounter our biggest resistance right before we have a change or breakthrough. And so it's a way for the limbic system, in a sense, to be kind of throwing out all the stops to keeping you thinking and feeling in the habitual ways that it's used to. And that when we can overcome that resistance and do it anyway, that's where, sometimes we see some of the biggest changes that occur. So there was a study done, I believe it was Harvard. Don't quote me on that though. It's been a while since I looked at this. But basically, what they discovered in this study is that 99% of people will give up when they're 99% of the way of achieving what their goal is. That there's something that happens in that last one, or maybe it's 2%. It was maybe 90, 99, somewhere around there. You get the idea. There's something that happens in that last 2% that really challenges us to stick with, kind of stick to our guns and go that distance. It's like it's another level of commitment that's required in order to get over that last hump. And so sometimes that's a good thing to kind of keep in the back of our mind. It's like, okay, so when the resistance is big, it probably means that you're getting close to something. And if we can orient to it from that space instead of buying into the messages that it's telling us, that creates more room to make different choices, right? Or to continue to move forward. All right, so that's the end of our time for questions. I see that there is one that I didn't get to address, so I'll make sure that I do that in my next blog. That's not a problem at all. And so let's take a moment now to go into a little bit of breath work. So we're going to do alternate nostril breathing for a few minutes, and then we're going to go right into a short meditation. And so, for those of you who already know how to do alternate nostril breathing, please go ahead and get started. For those of you that this is new, what we're going to do is you're going to take your left hand and you're going to put your index finger and thumb together, your three fingers straight, and then you're going to just set it palm facing up on your lap. So that's just going to sit on your lap. And then your right hand, your index finger and middle finger are going to just rest gently on the bridge of your nose. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our thumb on the one side and our ring finger on the other side to alternatively press in our nostrils so that we're breathing only in one side at a time. So before we start, you can just take a regular breath in through your nose, through both nostrils, and breathe out. And then you're going to use your thumb and close your right nostril and breathe in your left nostril. And then take your ring finger and close your left nostril and breathe out your right. And breathe in your right. Close your right and breathe out your left. Breathe in your left. Close your left and breathe out your right. Breathe in. Switch and breathe out. Breathe in. Switch and breathe out. Breathe in. Switch and breathe out. And then continuing at your own pace, breathing in, switching, and then breathing out the other side. And if you haven't closed your eyes already, go ahead and close your eyes. And as you continue to do this process of alternate nostril breathing, see if you can lengthen your breath. breath just a little bit more. Really taking in deep, long, slow inhalations and exhalations. Good. And continuing with a few more breaths. And then the next time that you breathe out on your left side, you can release your hand from your nose and just allowing it to sit in your lap, keeping your eyes closed, allowing your breath to return to normal, and just taking a moment to be that curious observer and notice what you notice inside now, just after a few minutes of alternate nostril breathing. You might have sensations in your body. You might notice that your mind is maybe slowed down. Thoughts aren't quite as prevalent. There may be a sense of calm and relaxation or other emotional states that are surfacing. So just noticing what you notice. And then we're going to take this energy with us into our meditation. So making sure that you're sitting comfortably, your eyes are closed, continuing to take deep breaths in and out. And as you continue to breathe, notice the environment around you, the sounds around you. Maybe there's traffic going by. Maybe you hear people talking. Perhaps there's the sound of a furnace or a fan running. Allowing all the noises and sounds around you. Allowing all of the sounds. Be in harmony with your environment. Take a deep breath in and let go. And now bringing our attention to our bodies. Our body is a gift from nature or the divine. Let's take a moment to honor our body. Bringing our attention to our feet. Our ankles and lower legs. knees, upper legs, hips and pelvis, lower abdomen, stomach, chest, back, right shoulder and right arm, left shoulder and left arm, neck, face, head, the whole body. The whole body. Take a deep breath in and let go. Now bringing our attention to our thoughts, being the curious observer of our thoughts, whether good thoughts or bad thoughts. Let them come. Do not resist any thought. Let them be. You are now in harmony with your thoughts. Take a deep breath in and let go. And now bringing our attention to our emotions. You are peace and joy. Becoming aware of your emotions. Becoming aware of your thoughts. Noticing any sensations in the body. Noticing the sounds around you. Take a deep breath in and breathe out. Another deep breath in and breathe out. And then slowly and gradually in your own time, coming back into the room, into the present moment. You might want to wiggle your fingers or your toes. You feel like stretching or moving the body. You can do a little bit of movement, stretch. And then when you're ready and in your own time, you can open your eyes. Just take a moment now to kind of notice internally what your internal state is at this moment. And if there is a sense of calm and relaxation or well-being of any kind, take a moment with the intention of just taking a breath in and breathing it into all of the cells, all of the tissues, all of the fibers, all of the space in your body, in your being. Soaking it in just a little bit more. Good. And then taking a moment to give gratitude for this practice, for this time together. And sending loving kindness and blessings to everyone in your life if you feel called to do so, or to the world, even better. And then once again, when you're ready, coming back into the present, opening your eyes. On that note, I wish you all a beautiful rest of your Saturday and all of the best in your retraining, your continued retraining process. And hopefully, I will see you here next month. Take care. Bye for now.